Mark Carney just did something no Canadian Prime Minister has done in nearly 20 years. While Trump was squeezing Canada with tariffs on steel, aluminum, and the auto sector, Ottawa quietly flew to the other side of the world, sat inside Australia's cabinet room, and walked out with deals that could connect 1.5 billion consumers into a trading bloc Washington never saw coming. Between March 3rd and 5th, 2026, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney flew to Sydney and then Canberra, the first bilateral visit by a Canadian Prime Minister to Australia in nearly 2 decades. This was not a symbolic trip. Carney sat alongside Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and the full Australian cabinet. He then addressed both houses of Australia's parliament in a speech that made clear Canada is repositioning itself on the world stage. The two governments released a joint statement covering investment, defense, critical minerals, clean energy, and artificial intelligence. And before Carney even left Sydney, one of the world's largest institutional investors made a commitment that sent a clear message to global markets. IFM Investors, an Australian firm managing pension funds with nearly $7 trillion in total capital, announced its intention to invest up to $10 billion directly into Canada. That is not a courtesy gesture. That is a capital vote of confidence. The details coming out of Canberra are specific and significant. Canada and Australia launched a new clean energy partnership focused on scaling clean energy technologies and modernizing electricity grids across both nations. On critical minerals, the two countries agreed to jointly develop lithium, uranium, and iron ore reserves. Together, Canada and Australia control roughly 1/3 of global supplies of these minerals, the same materials that power electric vehicles, semiconductors, and clean energy infrastructure. Both governments also opened formal negotiations to modernize the Canada-Australia Tax Treaty, a move that directly reduces barriers for businesses looking to invest across borders. On defense, the two countries agreed to explore reduced export controls, reciprocal sharing of intellectual property, and co-production of military capabilities. And Carney told reporters directly that he intends to conclude a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with Australia before the end of this year. These are not talking points. These are signed commitments and open negotiations. But the real story is just beginning. To understand why this visit matters, you need to understand what came before it. Justin Trudeau, who served as Canada's Prime Minister for nearly a decade, never once made a bilateral visit to Australia. Senior Canadian officials admitted openly to reporters, and the phrase they used was carefully chosen: "We haven't been as engaged the past few years." At the same time, Washington began using economic pressure as a political tool. Since early 2025, the Trump administration has placed tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, lumber, and the auto sector, treating Ottawa less like a sovereign partner and more like a supplier that needs to be managed. Australia faced similar treatment. Trump publicly criticized Australian leaders and said on camera that he does not like Australia's ambassador to Washington, former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. Two countries, two dominant neighbors, the same playbook used against both of them. That shared experience quietly built the conditions for exactly what is now unfolding. The consequences of this visit reach well beyond the two countries involved. The trade architecture Carney is proposing, a bridge connecting the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership with the European Union, would create a single trading bloc of approximately 1.5 billion people. A market that large could functionally absorb much of the trade access both Canada and Australia have lost from U.S. protectionism. The $10 billion investment commitment from IFM Investors is a direct signal that Australian institutional capital is now moving toward Canadian infrastructure and energy, diversifying Canada's investment base away from both American and Chinese sources simultaneously. The Joint Critical Minerals Agreement means that Beijing and Washington will now face a coordinated democratic alternative in lithium and uranium supply chains. Not two separate countries trying to compete individually, but a combined resource partnership with transparent governance and reliable delivery. And the modernized tax treaty, often overlooked in the broader headlines, is immediately practical. It lowers the friction for businesses in both countries that have been waiting for the right moment to expand across the Pacific. And this is where the situation becomes more complicated. The foundation of all these deals was not built in government offices or through years of formal diplomacy. It started at Pope Francis's funeral in Rome, where Carney and Albanese reportedly formed a genuine personal connection, and this Australia visit was not a standalone event. It was one stop on a 9-day Indo-Pacific tour that began in India, where Canada secured $5 billion in commercial agreements, including a $2.6 billion uranium supply deal, and continues next in Japan. Carney did not come to Canberra looking for a deal. He came with an architecture already drawn. Step back and look at what has actually been built this week. Carney's Middle Power Coalition is not designed around any single agreement. It is designed to be structurally durable, meaning it survives changes in the White House, changes in government, and changes in global mood. If the CPTPP bridge succeeds, it functions regardless of who occupies the Oval Office. The Defense Co-Production Agreement is particularly important for this reason. When Canadian and Australian military technology become intertwined through shared intellectual property and joint manufacturing, a future government that wants to walk away from the relationship faces enormous structural costs. The partnership becomes self-reinforcing. By securing investment from Australian pension funds managing $7 trillion in capital, Carney is doing something strategic at the same time. He is reducing Canada's reliance on American capital markets and Chinese financing, two sources of leverage that have historically constrained Canadian economic independence. And the three-leg design of the tour itself, India, then Australia, then Japan, is a deliberate message. Each leg produces real agreements. Each leg adds another node to the network. The message to Washington from all three stops is identical. Canada is not isolated. It has options. It has partners. And it spent 9 days demonstrating exactly that. This is not reactive diplomacy. This is coordinated architecture, and it was clearly planned well before the first flight departed Ottawa. And under 1 week, Mark Carney secured a $10 billion investment commitment, a critical minerals partnership covering 1/3 of global reserves, a clean energy framework, a defense co-production agreement, and open negotiations toward a trade deal linking 1.5 billion consumers. The last Canadian Prime Minister to address Australia's Parliament did so nearly 20 years ago. That 2-decade gap is the full story of how Canada delayed its own strategic expansion. The real result of this trip is not any single agreement. It is that Canada has now embedded itself into relationships that are far harder to pressure, isolate, or reverse. The next test arrives this summer when the USIMCA review opens and Washington finds out whether its leverage over Ottawa still holds.